It started at 1 a.m. on a weekend in October of 2011. Bored, sleepless, and aimlessly scrolling through Netflix, I came across a show that I'd only heard of and decided to give it a chance. A decade and a half later, MST3K has had an immeasurable impact on my life. I've planted my roots in Minnesota, traveled across the country for live performances and conventions working for the show's cast, and even survived depression because of its invaluable influence. Welcome to History Science Theater 3000, a channel that dives deep into the lore of the best show ever. I'm Zoe, your host, and I'm feeling a little self-conscious because this episode is about me. Before we get any further into this video essay series, I thought it would make sense for you all to hear my story. After watching this episode, I hope you'll trust me to guide you on this journey through the history of MST3K. And I invite you to share your personal stories of love and movie riffing with me as I stream on Twitch every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern, starting the day this episode drops. Anywho, a confluence of factors inspired me to click on MST3K the movie that night in the fall of my sophomore year of high school. My dad had been a fan since before I was born, so I knew there were robots and aliens involved. Most importantly, I recognized comedian Frank Conniff's name from his writing credit on my other favorite show, Invader Zim. I had actually seen MST3K before, just once, and for the same reason, I'm a lifelong insomniac. One night when I was about 4 or 5, I couldn't sleep, and I stumbled into the living room to find my dad watching what I now know was This Island Earth, aka MST3K, the movie. Even at that young age, I immediately caught on to the show's premise and began spewing my own riffs to mimic the robots. Dad quickly turned the show off after that, though whether it was because my jokes were annoying or he just didn't want me to learn the word dickweed, I'll never know. Still, the memory of Crow's silhouette against the theater screen never escaped me, and coincidentally, I discovered Mike and the Bots riffing the same film 10 years later. I don't really believe in signs, but doesn't that kind of seem like a sign? Fast forward back to high school. I watched a few more episodes, but my love of the series didn't kick into super hyperdrive until I discovered experiment number 404, Teenagers from Outer Space. Or in other words, my first Joel episode. Before that night, I didn't know that Mike wasn't the show's only host. By pure happenstance, he'd riffed every episode I'd seen until that point. I was surprised to see a face in a red jumpsuit for the first time. I asked my parents who the new guy was, which made them laugh, since they'd been fans since Joel was host. But as a new fan, how could I have known about the show's famously rotating cast? Or that Joel would become the most important crush of my life? When I woke up the next morning, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of affection so strong, it paralyzed me in bed for several moments. I couldn't even identify who it was for at first, until that friendly, red jumpsuited face swam into my memory, and I realized my poor 15-year-old heart had tripped and fallen over our favorite Midwestern ventriloquist. I was in a daze for the rest of the day, you guys, and I arguably still am. So, teenagers get celebrity crushes, but this one was special. Let me tell you why. At the beginning of this episode, I mentioned I've had depression. It was really bad. I'll spare you the gloomy details. For now, suffice it to say, I almost lost my life at the end of 8th grade, and I was hospitalized for nearly a week. In all my misery, I never learned how to be a human, let alone how to love other humans. I languished without purpose through my life for months after I was discharged, rotely surviving the days, but only barely. Nothing made me feel anything, until I felt that spark I discovered for Joel. Life changed instantly from meaningless to inspired. I rediscovered my creativity, my hunger for learning, my joy. In short, I began to embrace my personhood. Depression still haunts me sometimes, but it's never gotten as bad as it did in middle school, and now that I have this incredible gift of comedy supporting me, I'm sure it never will again. So that's how this all started. 2 years later, I was extremely fortunate to see Joel, Trace, Frank, Mary Jo, and Gruber perform live as Cinematic Titanic at the Castro Theater in San Francisco. I'll tell that whole story in another episode, but TLDR, it was the best day of my life and all my dreams came true. I shook Joel's hand, got his autograph on my artwork, and even managed to thank him for existing without my knees giving out from under me. Significantly, I also got to buy lunch for Trace and Frank. So, on a picturesque sunny afternoon in mid-October, 2 days after my second Mistyversary, I got to chat with 2 of my heroes for an hour. For the life of me, I don't remember what we talked about, because I was too lost in the moment. But they must have liked me, because 2 years later, they hired me to run their live tour as the Meds. Here's how that happened. Trace and Frank's first movie riffing performance as a comedy duo was hosted by the Voodoo Comedy Playhouse in Denver, less than an hour from where I was living at the time. It was sort of a one-off show, so they didn't have a manager or an agent yet. I'd been successful asking them to lunch in San Francisco when they were Cinematic Titanic, so I thought I'd try my luck again and ask if they needed help organizing a more formal comedy tour. And I was right, you guys. It's amazing what you can get just by asking. For the next year or so, I booked their shows, arranged their publicity, and got to travel as their assistant. We shared some wonderful moments, like seeing a live lemur at O-Comic-Con in Omaha, enjoying a complimentary backstage cheese plate at a theater in Milwaukee, and grabbing coffee while escaping the downpour in San Francisco. That day in particular was especially magical, because I had met them in that same city just a few years previously, except this time I didn't have to buy tickets to their show. My position with the Mads didn't last, but that's okay. I got more than a lifetime of experiences working with Trace and Frank, and all before I was even old enough to drink. Now, in my late 20s, I still celebrate our little puppet show. I have so many unique and prized memories from my time as a fan, and I wanted to share them with the world, hence this channel. For me, it started as a teenage celebrity crush and has evolved into a way of life that has provided me with invaluable friendships and endless laughter. I've never forgotten my roots as a depressed little girl. My history still drives my involvement with the show. I'll always be grateful for the reprieve from misery that this comedy art form provides me, and I know many of you can relate to that. Thank you for joining me on this very self-reflective episode of History Science Theater 3000. Check out my linktree for more ways you can interact with this channel, including getting your personal story told on an episode by becoming a patron. See you beautiful nerds next time.